Husband's been secretly working on a new life in another city, planning to start from scratch, and the funny thing about start from scratch is how it sounds like baking, like something wholesome with flour on your cheeks, not like the ache you feel when you realize the person who promises you forever is packing measuring cups you've never even seen into a box that isn't for your kitchen. Oh, sorry, hi, I'm Lila, I'm 30, I'm an urban planner. Which means I spend my days sketching better sidewalks and bus lanes and tiny pocket parks so strangers will have places to fall gently in love or fall safely apart. And I used to think I could draw stability into my own life, that I could draft a marriage like a master plan with setbacks and trees and sidewalks, and it would all line up if I kept my pencil sharp enough. The day I learned about his new life, I was researching zoning overlays in a browser with too many tabs, the way people who avoid their feelings have too many houseplants, and the printer started chirping from the other room like it had something urgent to confess, which was already weird because we barely print anything except return labels and crossword puzzles for my mother, but there it was, churning out a crisp lease agreement that didn't know how to be embarrassed, neat black type. Declaring that one Jonas Hale had secured a loft in a converted factory 200 miles away, and I remember standing there with my coffee cooling in my hand thinking Jonas as if my husband had tried a name on at a store and decided it made him taller. My husband's name is Ethan, or at least it was when he held my hands on the courthouse steps and told me we were a well-built house, not a tent. He's 32, a software engineer who can narrate a code deployment the way I narrate the life of a street, patient and precise. He hums when he brushes his teeth and counts stairs under his breath and saves every concert ticket. He remembers birthdays that aren't his and cries when dog videos ambush him. He is, or he has been, a quiet good man who buys the bruised peaches because he is certain they are sweeter, and what I am trying to tell you is that it didn't occur to me to suspect him of anything more calculated than hiding the lost cinnamon roll. I watched the fourth page slide into the tray and read the address at the top like it might shuffle itself into something reasonable, Mill and Foundry Lofts, the sort of aspirational gentrification name that comes with Edison bulbs and polished concrete and a book about local history placed artfully on a coffee table. And there was his signature, this neatie that loops like it's looking over its shoulder, and then the deposits, the date, the move-in window, all of it so clean and official that it made me irrationally mad at the printer for doing such a confident job. I called his name even though he was at the office because sometimes I forget how the world works when the inside of my chest is making thunder without asking me first. Then I texted my sister, Priya, who works in public health and can speak fluently about harm reduction and also about the precise tone you should use when you yell at a customer service representative, and all I wrote was, "Is there a reasonable explanation for this lease?" And I sent a photo and she replied with, "Yes, his planning to surprise you with a pied-à-terre and a second personality. I'm on my way, which is sister brain for I love you more than our childhood grudges and I am putting on shoes right now." I sat on the couch with the lease in my lap like a cat I didn't remember adopting, and I tried to inhale the way my yoga teacher tells me to inhale, all the way to the bottom of the lungs where stories go when they're not ready to be told, and I thought about how lately he's been heads down on a deadline, how he has been working late, the kind of double late that means don't ask, and how his eyes sometimes felt a second too far away when he looked at me, like I was a window and he was measuring light. The thing about being an urban planner is that your job is to anticipate movement, cars, people, money, desire, and suddenly I realized I had been doing exquisite traffic modeling everywhere but my house, telling myself that his new habit of keeping his phone face down was about focus, that the weekend he drove to visit Aiden from college and came back with the smell of a city I didn't recognize on him, oily and metallic and a little like rain on stone, was nostalgia, that the extra credit card was for point stacking because Ethan is a nerd about points the way I am about bus rapid transit, but the lease sat there having no use for my rationalizations. When Priya arrived, she didn't knock because sometimes the door is just a suggestion. She came in with a paper bag from the corner bakery, the one that pretends croissants are medicine, and she looked at the contract the way you look at a map that might have been drawn by a liar. She read fast and then slow, then touched the signature with the tip of her nail like it might not be dry and said, "Okay, we hate this. But we are going to be smart." We were smart in the way women have learned to be smart while still loving people who are not currently being kind. We looked for context not to excuse him but to see the edges of the mess, and context arrived in the form of a Gmail notification dinging me like a tiny bell in a quiet church. "Your flight to Hartfield has been booked," which made no sense because I had not booked any flight, and the confirmation nestled itself into an email account we share for exactly this reason. And yes, I no, some of you will say, "Lila, how did you not know everything already when you share a freaking email?" And I will tell you, trust is a muscle you can overtrain until it tears. Hartfield, as it turns out, is in that new city. I won't say the name because this isn't a true crime podcast and because the city didn't do anything wrong. An old river town with a new tech corridor and a mayor who loves press conferences about innovation hubs, and my brain, which is an unrepentant dweeb, started filling in economic development details even as my heart went outside to scream on the lawn. Seasonal service. I muttered, low-cost carrier expanding its reach, and Priya looked at me gently like she does when I recite zoning numbers while frying onions and said, "Focus, honey." We combed through the last couple months like archivists, calmly, carefully, telling ourselves we were not Frankenstein assembling a monster but historians reassembling an event, and the story organized itself without our permission. A new bank account, a P.O. box, a series of calendar invites titled Heads Down, a set of Venmo payments from a woman named Ray Herb, sometimes for coffee and sometimes for utilities. The question mark always the worst part, and a Slack thread with his friend about taking the plunge dotted with rocket emojis, and my favorite, if favorite is a word you can put next to betrayal, a Pinterest board titled Microloft Piece, which honestly, Ethan, if you're going to lie to me, at least lie on a platform I don't use for street furniture ideas. I didn't know who Ray was, not in the detective sense, though her profile picture showed a person with a soft mouth and eyes that can make you say too much. The plant emoji could have meant nothing or everything. I went back through his stories, his co-workers, our friend groups, and found no Ray in the usual circles, which made me think she was a gym friend or a cafe friend or the kind of friend who appears when you send your heart out unsupervised at 2 a.m. into the DMs of strangers who say, "I see you," and mean, "I see the version of you I want." We made a plan because plans are the scaffolding you build so the grief doesn't fall on your head. I would breathe a lot and text Ethan, "Hey, the printer grew a conscience," which is how we joke when we want to stop choking, and then ask him if there was something he wanted to tell me before the dog-eared paper did it for him. Priya would stay, not as an audience but as a first responder. I would not throw anything except possibly my expectations into the sun. We would listen to his mouth and also to our guts, and we would write things down because people rewrite their story mid-sentence to make themselves the protagonist even when the plot is mean. He called instead of texting back. Of course he did. "Some men here, we need to talk like a fire alarm and their first instinct is to hold a press conference, Lila," he said, and my name sounded like a small apology as it left his mouth. "What did you print?" And I said, "A new life," and I wish you could have seen how silence arranged itself between us. It put out chairs and a pitcher of water and said, "Take your time." Then he did the thing decent people do when they know the truth is heavy. He didn't deny it like an amateur. He said, "Okay, I'll come home now." He came home with his face in a shape I didn't recognize, older by exactly the number of days he'd been living two timelines. He sat in our living room that we made together from thrift frames and the rug my mother gave us because she said every marriage needs a soft place to stand, and he did not try to make me laugh, which is a kindness disguised as restraint. Instead he asked, "Do you want me to tell it or do you want to ask me pieces?" And it's absurd how loving a question can sound while it delivers devastation to your couch. "Start where it turns into a choice," I said, because work taught me that's where stories get honest. "Somewhere after the accident that made you who you are and before the excuse you think will help," and he nodded like I had given him a map he could read, and he began with October, a conference in Hartfield. Lunch turned into conversation, turned into a panel, turned into a drink, turned into a walk. "Her name's Ray," he said, and there it was. The soft mouth and the plant emoji rooted in the room. "We talked about building things," he said, "how cities teach you to tell the truth if you look long enough, and she said we could make something from scratch and I wanted to know if I could be less predictable. There is a cruel, glittering lure to reinvention, especially if you are a person who is colored inside the lines so long your fingers know only that grip." I get it, I do. Cities do it all the time, slap a new brand on themselves and declare they are made of light and hustle. Meanwhile the old bricks are still under the paint, and Ethan, who has always been gentle and careful and responsible, had stumbled into a story where he could be electric and new, and I could see how it seduced him even as I wanted to shake him by the shoulders and say, "You can be new with me, you idiot, that's allowed." "I rented the loft," he said, because I wanted evidence I could be brave, and I said, "You spelled coward wrong, because sometimes you need to put your foot down on a sentence or men will float away into metaphors." His eyes flooded. He wiped them with the sleeve I bought him for Valentine's like he was mopping a spill of himself. "I thought if I built it," he said, "if I had the address, the keys, the promise of rooms, I could walk into a version of me who deserved it." And at the exact same time Priya whispered, "Oh honey," and I whispered, "Oh honey," which is sisterhood and also grief recognizing itself in mirrors. We talked for hours, and when I say talked, I mean he told me truths so knotted we had to sit on the floor and untangle them with both hands, how he didn't fall out of love with me but fell out of seeing himself next to me, how he began narrating our routine like a list of errands, how her laughter made him feel like a surprise, how the city felt like a dare he was allowed to take, how he hated himself at least as much as I wanted to hate him, how he had planned to tell me next week after one last trip because next week people is a fairy tale we tell to postpone today. I didn't scream. I didn't throw his shoes at the wall. I cried the way you cry at a bus stop, quietly in a responsible posture because your body remembers to be decent even when your heart would like to become weather, and when I could speak I said, "You don't get to use urbanism to explain adultery," and he nodded like a student who has been assigned reading, but also, I continued, surprising myself, I understand wanting to be someone else, to stand in a new light, to say, maybe the problem isn't my choices but my coordinates. Priya is a goddess who knows when to become furniture. She sat with us without trying to tidy the air, and when it got too hot she said, "Water," like a director calling for a reset, and handed each of us a glass, and I realized how blessed I am to have a person who loves me in simple, functional ways that don't try to win an award. By midnight we had a plan that was both generous and unglamorous. He would not go to Hartfield next week, he would not go anywhere without sending me a calendar invite. We would go to couples therapy because this was either the beginning of a salvage operation or the humane end of a building. He would email Ray and tell her he had been a man who let flattery unmake his promises. And he would send the lease termination request first thing in the morning, the deposit be damned, because sometimes you have to pay the tax on your own bad fantasy. If you're rolling your eyes, it's fine, I can feel you from here, I know how this reads, how neat plans are compared to messy desires. But I want to tell you that repair is an unsexy craft and some of us would like to at least try it before we burn the house. I am not prescribing it to anyone else, I am just telling you what I did with my hands when the printer confessed. In therapy, Aubrey, that's her name, we liked how she said like she was tasting each truth, asked us to say the ugliest sentence and not dress it up. Mine was, "I'm afraid I'll rebuild you only to have you leave with my best carpentry." His was, "I'm afraid I am smaller than the life I promised." And we sat there while those sentences took their shoes off and made themselves comfortable, and then Aubrey said, "Now say the kindest true thing." And I said, "You are not a villain, you are a person who chose poorly," and he said, "You are the bravest map I've ever read," which sounds like a line but it felt like a rope thrown down a well. We did the work that isn't Instagrammable. We audited our calendars the way you audit bike lanes. Who gets priority? What are the choke points? We wrote a schedule for the domestic things the patriarchy taught us to do invisibly and then told us we were nagging when we asked for help. We tried a different dinner time because hangry spouses are urban heat islands. We removed the performative size from our vocabulary. We turned our phones face up and plugged them in across the room like you put cars in garages so the street is free for humans again, and every week we reported to Aubrey like nerds because we are. And Ray, you're wondering about her, aren't you? Because narratives love a triangle. She sent one email, not to him, to me, that said, "I am sorry, I didn't know it would be like this. I wanted art and got architecture," which made me laugh in spite of myself because we all think we're poets when we're scared. I wrote back, "I don't need a villain, I need a boundary, please respect it," and she did. And I didn't cyberstalk her after that because my nervous system deserves peace more than my curiosity deserves drama. The lease termination was a comedy of bureaucracy as levers and gears and legalese tried to keep his fantasy alive for another month, but he ate the fee like a grown-up, and the key fob he had insisted on picking up just to see the neighborhood sits in our kitchen drawer now, a warning and a relic, and sometimes I look at it and imagine the life inside that loft, the windows, the polished concrete, the mornings he would have pretended were courageous, and I grieve not for the life he almost built but for the version of him that thought he had to build it without me. I won't lie and tell you I trust him the way I did when we were 26 and the biggest secret he had was a surprise puppy plan. My trust now is like a bridge after an earthquake, inspected, posted, one lane open with a cautious speed limit. But it carries us, it carries groceries and jokes and bad moods and the delight of finding a cherry in the bottom of a whiskey sour. It carries better than I thought a cautious bridge could carry. We mark time in practical milestones. 3 honest months, no secret calendars, 2 dinners with friends where he told the story himself instead of making me the narrator, 1 hard conversation with his mother who thinks relationships are unbreakable if you keep them in crystal cabinets, and the morning I woke up and realized I had not thought about Hartfield in a week, which felt like weight you don't know you're holding until you set the bag down and your spine says thank you. Do you want to know the best part, the part that made me think repair might just be another word for redesign? We took the train to that city together. We did it on purpose and not in a rush. We sat by the window and I wore my patient shoes and he wore a face that had learned to look at me directly, and we walked the neighborhood where he almost put his next self. And I let myself enjoy the pedestrian improvements and the way the old mill's smokestack casts a shadow like a sundial on the plaza. And we ate tacos in a place that smelled like cumin and courage, and he ran his hand along the wrought iron of the loft building without flinching and said, "I was going to be lonely here and call it liberation," and I nodded because that's exactly the lie reinvention sells. We went home that night, our home, the one with the thrift frames, and he pulled out a cardboard tube from under the couch like a magician. I tense because I am not ready for surprises unless they come with municipal permits, and he unfurled a map, a hand-drawn map of our apartment like a site plan with labels not for furniture but for experiences. This is where you dance while stirring curry. This is where I tell you jokes that only land 60% of the time and you laugh at the effort anyway. This is where the plant refuses to die. This is where I almost left and didn't, and I cried into the contes because the map of a life you choose each day is the best kind of urbanism, messy and human and full of desire lines that turn into paths because you dare to walk them more than once. Do I think we're fixed? No. I think we're fixing, which is a verb that makes room for Tuesdays when you'd rather be someone else and Thursdays when you remember you can just be better at being you. We still have the key fob in the drawer and we still have the printer, and sometimes when it hums I look up like it might be clearing its throat to testify again. But mostly it prints return labels and instructions for building a bookshelf we built together and the directions for the sourdough he makes on Sundays because repetition can be a sacrament if you do it with attention. If you're listening because you're in the middle of your own renovation, because you found a folder or a new email address or a lease printed by a machine that doesn't know mercy, here's what I can offer: not advice, not commandments, just field notes from a woman who designs streets and is learning to design her life with the same patience she gives to curb cuts. Let your friends sit with you like good park benches, solid and present. Say the ugly sentence out loud. Don't weaponize the beautiful sentence. Make the plan even if you end up choosing another plan. Trust your body when it says we are not safe and also when it says we are safe again. Remember that a new city isn't salvation, it's a location, and you are allowed to change coordinates without erasing the map. Ethan asked me last week if there's a version of this story where I leave anyway, and I said yes because honesty is a kindness I owe both of us. I could leave and love myself well, and I would design good sidewalks in a new neighborhood and teach a new kettle to sing, and he nodded and said, "Thank you for not making the only safe choice the one that includes me," which is the sentence of a man who is learning not to build a life with stolen scaffolding. For now we are here, making coffee with the same clumsy filter holder that has survived 3 apartments. He puts his hand on my back when I lean into the window to check the weather like it owes me a personal forecast. I run my fingers along the spine of the map he drew and remember that every great street started as a line on paper and then became real because people kept choosing it, step after step. And sometimes the courage isn't in starting from scratch somewhere else but in starting from honesty exactly where you are and letting that be the new life you thought lived 200 miles away. And if the printer ever chirps again with another lease, another flight, another fiction, I know where the breaker box is. I know how to cut the power and light a candle and call a locksmith and a lawyer and a friend who brings croissants like first aid. But today it hums like a well-behaved appliance. I hum back, and the day opens in front of me like a street I helped draw, familiar and still surprising, not perfect but ours. And I step into it with both feet, not because I forgot what happened, but because I remember who I am when it does.